presentation I would like to discuss methods that has developed in my meetings with students. Where we
Speak up, please, it's hard to hear.
Yeah, okay. In this presentation I would like to discuss methods that has developed in my meetings with students, where we've been working with what I call process-based movement analysis and interpretation. Can you hear me? The working conditions for dancers have changed a lot since I finished my education 30 years ago, especially when it comes to the creation process. If a dancer traditionally was presented to a ready-made material and then worked with the interpretation of it, one can say that a dancer of today expects and wants to be more active and participatory in the creation process, and that she interpret ideas, thoughts, or visions out from a dialogue with the choreographer. Maybe some movement material comes out as a result of that discussion, maybe not. Out from that understanding, a dancer of today could be an interpreter of a dialogue as well as of a movement material. You meet this not only in the freelance world but also at institutions. This demands something different from the dance educations, and we are, more or less, still stuck in and struggling with an old system in how to teach dance. Today the students needs to be provided with and develop other kinds of tools than before. My question that rise out from that are, how can you discuss and verbalize your artistic process? What is it to analyze and interpret a movement material, and how do you develop methods for that? These questions became even more urgent since I took office here at DOCH 5 years ago as a professor in interpretation, where I'm also responsible for the development of that field of study. Here at DOCH I teach courses in interpretation on all levels and in all programs, and I've been doing that on and off even before I became a professor, parallel with my career as a dancer. I danced for 35 years professionally, and I also worked a lot as a rehearser. Now I'm not dancing that much anymore, and when I work outside DOCH I rehearse or coach dancers and circus artists, and sometimes also choreographers. That keeps me updated with what's going on out there, which I think is necessary when you work with education. Not for giving the students tools to adjust to the market, rather to help them to develop tools to change the market and create the most ultimate circumstance for their own work. Through my teaching I work with different methods in order to guide dance students in their analysis and interpretation of movement materials and other dance-related tasks. And when I say that, I mean that when it comes to situations where, as a professional dancer, you meet a choreographer that you discuss with, and out from the discussion the movement material grows. Yeah? I have no manual for this, but at least I have some guidelines I use that allow flexibility and openness towards the diversity of thoughts and actions in the studio. I call my method process-based movement analysis, since it's a work in process, not always in progress, though I like loop backwards and to dive and to fly. So, a work in process guided by the questions that arises out from the work that the student is doing with themselves. The ideas with the movement material. Through this they create individual tools and methods. My idea when I start a course is to create situations or seminars together with the students where they can develop beside their physical practice a verbal language for their practice and other necessary tools for working with the movement material. This could of course look very different depending on the situation, the amount of people that participate, or the level of the students. I could never show this here because it really stretches over weeks, but I will try to show it by doing and talking. Time is a prerequisite for it to work. Last week I was listening to Steve Paxton, and he said he spent between 1962 and 1965 exploring the walking and the standing. So, yeah. So I identified 3 steps in this process that I call reflection, relation, and dialogue. I go through these steps, but I must say, just regarding to your question, that they most of the time overlap, and they don't come in this order. So this chronological way of presenting them is not quite true. The examples I mentioned are experienced from working with street, ballet, jazz, and folk dance students at the pedagogy department here at DOCH in spring 2012. The first thing we do when we meet is to talk. Starting in identifying methods and tools that they use when they first meet a movement, material, or a task. This is done both by discussions in small groups and presentations among the students, out from more general questions like, what kind of tools do you use in your practice, and what is your methods when you first approach the material? And that could be movement material or improvisation, out from a text. Even if they haven't worked as dancers, most of them have some kind of experience through endless amount of dance classes and maybe smaller productions. In these discussions, I also ask them to try to define things they feel that they need to work on and things they feel that they are good at. This has a double effect. As you know, when you put words on an experience, you start inventing more possibilities with the outcome of the experience, and your mind starts oscillating between thought and action. And when you hear others describing their experience, you can get ideas on how to do things that you wouldn't have thought of. New possibilities stand out that emerge from the thinking and the listening. The students appreciate these discussions a lot. Either you're becoming a dance pedagogue or a dancer, you need to develop a language for your practice. And I must say that the language could also be oscillating between words and showing. Sometimes the movements are like an articulation of a thought, but you need to sort of complement your words with moving. To spend time on the reflection part of the process is therefore really the base in my teaching. The next thing I call relation, and by that I mean the relation that the students builds to the movement material. I always work face-to-face, one-on-one in the studio. And we start the process with the movements out from what the students spoke about in the reflections that regarding things that they need to work on and that guides our work that we do together. In order for the student to develop methods, they need to understand their own learning process. And the only way to do this is to give the student the mandate that the students ask the questions and should thereby guide the work in what they do and say. I'm not there to tell them how to do this. I can suggest and give options, like an outside eye. For example, some of the students need the movement material to identify or articulate what kind of methods they use or need to develop. The material evokes the question. Their reflection starts through an immediate contact with the movements and in dialogue with me as the outside eye. While it's easy for others to discuss and reflect over these things without starting from the movements. I have to drink. You can ask questions during also. The movement material we work with is either the student's own, which could be out from a text, it could be improvisation, or we work with written material that I teach them. These are, of course, very different circumstances. I'll explain why. If we work with the material suggested by the student, the material could illuminate their reflections through their own choices with, for example, dynamic, speed, stillness. And that often shows clearly what they need to problematize in their practice. This is like working from the inside and out. Where were you? Inside out person before. We never start from the choreographic composition as such. It's not a course in composition, and I'm not a choreographer. we work with how they should be able to do it the way they want. If we work with the written material suggested by me, the student needs to navigate towards another movement landscape than they would have chosen themselves. Not always, but almost. Which could illuminate the reflections out from a more technical aspect. This challenges the student in another way, and it creates possibilities for them to develop other kinds of tools than in my first example, because the movements are supposed to be done exactly as I show. It's more like working from the outside and in, adjusting to something. And how do you adjust? Both these ways of working, own or written material, develops the students' way of working with themselves as performers. The artistic process is a process of change and chains of possibilities. A humble way to approach an understanding and a belief in that time does something to you. So how do I give tasks in relation to these different ways of exploring and developing tools? I will give you some examples, but I can't tell all varieties. They always appear in the meeting with each student, and there's no manual for that, as I said. Every situation is unique. These are just examples. If the student works with their own material, I always start by asking them to do it a couple of times in order for us to start sharing the landscape of the movements and the, let's say, the atmosphere in the room. What guides next is what the student has mentioned as things to work on, in this reflection part, which frames the work that we do together. As an example, I worked with a folk dance student, and he had explained the need to develop methods and tools in how to deal with dynamic shifts. I'm not a folk dancer. I'm very embarrassed now.
I don't like it.
So it was this polska, it was this step, and it was there, at that moment, that he felt he lost himself. It's a question of a millisecond, but it's a detail. So, I asked him to choose a part in the material, and it was that part he chose. And we started to enter into the sequence from different places. First by doing the movement that was just before the dynamic shift. Experiencing and exploring the exact moment of the shift and how he treated it. What he was thinking, what he felt, what his body was doing. Analyzing exactly what happened from his experience of doing it and from mine watching. And out from the question on how he was dealing with it. Example of his questions were, am I articulating the shift by putting too much force? Or by thinking too much on the shape? How do I work with my breathing in the shift? How do I use my focus? Through the question that came up, the student framed the situation and found out exactly what he was doing, which was how he calibrated the energy between his balance and the shift. He used too much force. So we went through this moment on and off. Oh, shit. Sorry.
Take it easy.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. His own questions were crucial for his own understanding, so to say, to conclude. The street student, he had made a really fast material. It was another one. I won't show that because I can't. It was on the floor. The task we agreed on was that he should work with the movement in half tempo, to manipulate with the time around and within, and then successively speeding it up. By changing the sense of time, the movements changed. The aim was not to change the movement, but by doing it many times and in different speeds, his experience of it changed, which in turn changed the movement, and this made him familiar with it. When we work with the written material, we start in the same way, by the student doing the material a couple of times, but this time I asked the student to choose a dilemma in the material. That will then be our place of departure. The first thing then is to ask the student to analyze and formulate why she experiences it as a dilemma. Then it's not enough to say, for example, I don't like it. I don't like the material, I don't like these movements. The interesting thing is why you don't like the material, and how can you get to know it another way. To dislike a movement can have many different reasons. It can remind you of someone or something that you need to deal with in order to process the material. It can start associations to things that you strongly dislike or you feel really uncomfortable with because you don't recognize the aesthetics. That was the thing when I worked with a ballet student. She felt she lost the sense in a specific movement. She could not recognize herself or feel herself. It was the movements were not in the vocabulary that she was used to. Out from the analysis that she did, she found out that it was the relation between the movement of the head and the movement of the arm that she lost it. Yeah, exactly that moment. So she started to work with just the head, doing the whole sequence with just the head, and then adding the arm. And that was the logic for her. She came back the day after, and through this reduced work, she had found out that the problem was just the initiation of the movement with the arm in relation to the head, just that moment. She needed to be less articulated in order to be able to let the movement with the head and the arm be in dialogue, to ask them to listen to each other. She then worked with them as parallel or intertwined actions, increasing the gap between them and the next second letting them just melt into together. And that was how she explained it for me. In the last step of this course, the last thing we do as an examination is a dialogue part, where we have a seminar where all students participate and individually present the work they have done by showing and talking and discussing the process around what tools they have explored and developed and how they solved the eventual dilemmas. They sometimes also use each other to show on. By this, a lab situation is created where nothing is right or wrong. That's not the thing. We observe, reflect, and discuss the practice of moving. The idea when working with process-based movement analysis is identifying problems and questions and trying to answer them through different tasks that we make up together. Through the diversity of answers, alternatives discerned in how to take care of the moment in the movement. It's fantastic to see how they interact and share ideas in this dialogue and how they come to understand how different a similar experience can be expressed, which develops their understanding of their own learning processes. I believe strongly in the students' exploration of how to verbalize their processes with their own words and in dialogue with the material, and that you really need to practice that over and over again, since we're all in constant change in how we perceive the world. Words can never replace the physical practice, but they can be complementary and help the student to understand their learning processes and their practice, and by that can develop further as pedagogues and performers. I would actually like to finish by quoting you, Chrissa. Language is very useful in physical processes for its ability to make distinctions between things. Movement is useful for its ability to humble and question those distinctions. Thank
you. Okay. Questions? Yes.
I'm just curious, Cecilia, if you could put your work in context. You say that you're working with one student.
Yeah.
Do they come to you and say, I need help with this or this? How does it work in a
So, of
practical
course,
sense?
yeah, I could do that also. Sometimes they do. They drag me into the studio and want me to help them.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly it's a course
Okay.
that I do to the students. Yeah.
And is that optional for them to sign up for this, or is it part of their curriculum?
It's part of the curriculum.
Thank you.
This is fantastic. And what I want to know is, because you said you don't deal with composition, are you working with choreography teachers to take this that you've developed to use it with choreography students?
Yeah. Sorry, I don't understand.
So they're using material and refining themselves as a performer, as I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
But what you're describing is so much a process that I'm exploring with choreographers, but you've done such a beautiful job of breaking this down, and I'm wondering, is there anybody in your university who's teaching composition or choreography who's using these methods, or that you're working with the choreographers to look at what are their dilemmas, how do they
Can you say it again?
Please stand up and
No, I'm just wondering about choreographer, people who teach choreography using these same methods, because I think you said you don't use this specifically with composition, and I feel that there is a yawning need for this kind of work with choreographers, specifically on how they're developing their dances, not only how to, this is great, and can it go that other step?
What I meant is that I never, if the student comes with their own material, I never discuss the choices of the order of the movements, because that's what
No,
I'm interested
yes,
in.
I understand
But,
that.
yeah, but I work with the choreographers also, but that's mostly outside professional choreographers who needs, you know, to discuss their ideas in how to work with the dancers. And so in that sense, I do.
See, can I just remind you that you have often said that this way of teaching dancers and working with them will have to change how choreographers approach them.
Yeah.
Because they will have a different way of asking for, in dialogue. So I think that has to do with what you're saying.
Yeah, because that was my goal, to work that way, to start from the dancers, since I feel that the dancers of today are so much. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that. But I wish I was a dancer of today. I wish I was 20. In that sense, I would. Yeah.
first you and
Just what's the ideal duration for you in that kind of business? How long?
I usually meet the students first, a full day of discussions, and setting up sort of and deciding whether to work with own or written material. And then I meet them one by one, and I want them to have time between. So I give them tasks, and then it's maybe, so I try to do a schedule where they have days, so I book studios so that they can go and work.
Over like a month?
No, it's question, maybe a week.
first you.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. You said us that you are working in the field of dance for 30 years now, and when somebody would come to you and say, "Oh, I want to do your job. It's perfect. I want to do this." What would you say? What do you need to do your work? So that means, how much do you have to know to work with dance people like you do? What kind of method, reflection of methods do you need? What kind of habitus as a dancer do you need? What knowledge about, or which knowledge about different dances do you need? What would you say?
Well,
It's a good question. I think my need to, I can only talk out for myself. My need came maybe 15 years ago, that and it came out from an experience through my body, and which I think is necessary that I have when I do my work. Now, is that an answer? No. Maybe I didn't understand the question.
Yeah, there is a big knowledge behind it.
Yes.
No? You have a really great knowledge, a lot of experience, and if you want other people to do your work, what do they need to do this? What do you think? Is it experience for a long time, or is it a specific knowledge as a dancer, or what do they need to do this work?
I think they need a need to research in how to do things. That is my answer. Yeah. A need to understand why. I mean, how. Because there is a skill, absolutely.
And is it possible to learn the skill, or is it experience?
It goes by this. It's like parallel actions in different speeds. Sometimes they go like that.
Right, that's it.
Yeah, I was just curious, Cecilia, when you're working with a student one-on-one,
Yeah.
do the other students observe how you are working with the one-on-one student?
Not the first times I meet them, because I think it's very important for them to have that total that they are really in focus. Because usually we teach, big groups, and to be alone like that and just to coach and discuss is, even if it's only 15 minutes,
Yes.
it's better than 2 hours together with 30 others. That could also be good. But then maybe in the end of the process, we do that, just because it's also pedagogist to understand and to develop how to do it.
If there was 2 or 3 who were just observing, that it carries on some of your knowledge.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good.
I would say I think it's also a personality thing, because I had her when she became a dance teacher, and she was already then curious. I think it's curiosity and an openness to things that happen. She had it from the beginning.
So that's a compliment.
More questions? Okay, sorry.
Do you find when you ask that original question to students, what is your process, or what are your methods, that many students struggle with that, or do they come because they're coming here, I suppose, already having a sense of their process?
Now, many of them say, I don't have a process, and then when we start to discuss, they have a process.
They just don't know.
Yeah, they know exactly what they're doing. And what I find interesting also is that, no, I shouldn't go into that.
Yes.
Yes, is that when I see, when we work with the material, and they are doing it, and then after we say, okay, I can say, what did you think of when you were doing it? And then they start from the beginning. When I was here, I thought of my what I'm going to eat tomorrow. And then, just to this, all those different layers that you carry inside. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not concentrated, but it's in the movement that all your thoughts just passes through your head, And that I also find as a part of the process for a dancer, to go in and out of in the moment.
I must ask you something short, because I think you're talking about choreographers, but to me, when I listen to you, when I met you here and discussed with you, I also think that what you're doing, something that for me as a dance teacher, something I can use, because I think you work with technique, dance technique, in a different way than we do in dance class. And I think that, what do you think about that, that also as dance teacher, take from this kind of thinking into the dance class, but then you work with the whole group.
Yes, and when you teach technique class, you don't have the same freedom, time-wise. You have 1 hour and 15 minutes.
Yes,
but
it's
very hard
it's up to me to also question the tradition of the dance class.
Yes. Exactly.
Yes. Okay, and now it's 11 o'clock. You did it. Thank you so much for, yes.
You can say that coffee was,
Yeah.
I haven't, you know that.
No.